welcome to another WaterTrek 360. I apologize for the background noise. We're in a little coffee shop, and so there will be some ambient noise. Hopefully I can clean this up post-production. I will be interviewing Collin Beirne. I met him about a month and a half ago while diving in Long Island Sound. I was intrigued by this piece of equipment he was using. I had not seen anything like it before. Being the geek that I am when it comes to technology and ocean science, I wanted to get a better understanding of what the heck he was doing. Introduce you to Collin Beirne. So, Collin, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're doing, what graduate program you're in, etc.
So I go to the University of Maine. The program is the School of Marine Science, but I have a concentration in dual marine science, marine biology, and oceanography. Mm-hmm. And what the sensor does is that it records different data points, varying depths.
Okay. Now, the graduate degree that you're in is concentrating on what?
Primarily biological oceanography. So I'm looking more at the physical aspects of how the physical aspects might affect biological aspects.
Okay. So how the oceans are changing, evolving based on, current climate and demographic and oceanographic changes. Okay, great. This project specifically does what?
It measures flow with the little rotationary device in the top. Mm-hmm. It measures light with the little light sensor on top, and temperature with the little thermistor on the top.
Okay, so it measures flow, meaning water flow.
Yes.
It measures light, ambient light, yes, coming from above. And then the sensors, what was the last piece?
It's a thermistor, so it measures
the temperature. Okay, right. This enables you to do what? Measure photosynthesis?
Measure flow velocity and how it affects photosynthesis.
Okay, so the water moving in the water column and the changes to the rate of photosynthesis based on where you are.
Yes.
Okay, great. Now, where have you done these tests? Mostly Long Island Sound?
Yes, only Long Island Sound.
Only Long Island Sound. Okay. So it measures it, and you mentioned, so there were three devices you talked about. There's a flow device,
yes,
which spins apparently, and then measures just like a wind anemometer that says everything. Okay, and a thermometer or a thermostat that says temperature, and then the light meter, which is ambient light.
Yes.
So you did mention something to me that I found interesting, and that was that regardless of whether it was cloudy or not, mm-hmm, that it didn't make a difference on your light meter and what the rate of photosynthesis would be. Why is that?
Clouds don't really affect the amount of light that comes in because the light spectrum goes from visible to completely not visible, and there's just a tiny amount of the light spectrum that's visible. So the light that's coming through that clouds is not the visible light, so it absorbs the non-visible light.
Okay, that's the part that I didn't get when you mentioned on the boat. So it really isn't visible light, and you're right, it's a very tiny spectrum. It's all of the light ranges, including visible light, that this is being. Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me. Okay, so you built this yourself, right? And this is the first version, is the beta?
This
is the previous version? I mean, what?
The third version.
The third version. Oh, what did the first two look like?
The first version was just basically a crate, and this was just attached to the crate with a bunch of weights in it. Mm-hmm. But that was really bulky and needed a lift bag to go up and down.
Ah, okay, yeah, very cumbersome, hard to move, and put a lot of strain on you while you were diving, right? Okay, and what about the second version?
The second version was pretty much this buoy that I used to mark the location and keep keep it so that's sitting upright. Mm-hmm. But there was also another cable here that would make sure it doesn't get caught. So I have like a redundancy so I can retrieve it both ways.
Okay.
But that line kept getting in the way, and I was afraid I was going to get tangled up with too many lines in the water.
How many feet of line do you have on that?
at least 50.
Okay, so the deepest you've measured to date is what, 30 feet, 50 feet?
About 25, 30.
Okay, 25, 30. Yes, because when I saw Colin, we were diving in a place near Penfield Reef, just off the Fairweather Lighthouse. And when I said, hey, I'll go down and video you as you set this, then he disappeared. And I didn't realize he went back up. So he's sitting on the surface while I'm swimming around going, oh, okay. I didn't. To me, that was first time like, wow, that's a little boring. But he needed to do that because he needed to be able to get back down and retrieve the gear. So it really was not pleasure diving. It was work diving. Now, inside of this, there's software and there are computer components and stuff. Tell us a little bit about that.
All right. Inside.
Whoop. Oh, okay.
So everything in here.
Pardon us while we do this. Okay.
All the connections.
Yeah. So now you built this yourself, correct? And there's software that's running on this?
Yeah, so when I turn it on.
And what did it, and you wrote this software yourself? Okay. What'd you write it in?
Arduino.
Oh, okay. Cool. I was an IT guy for 45 years, so. All right. So what do we got?
So we have the SD card here.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty much the biggest importance that I have.
Mm-hmm.
Because if that's not working, I'm not going to get any data.
Right. Right.
All stored there. Just retrieve it.
Mm-hmm.
And then over here, I have a clock. So I know what time it is. During the day, I can record the amount of time. And then this is the main motherboard where the program goes in. So over here, we have the thermistor area where I just plug in the thermistor here.
Yep.
Where it measures the resistance. The light sensor is also resistance dependent. So the amount of light that goes in, it's a little bit confusing sometimes.
Sure.
Because when light goes in, it depends. The resistance goes down for higher light conditions, and then the resistance goes up for lower light conditions.
Okay. Right. And with all these electronics, it had to be kind of nerve-wracking to waterproof this, right? I mean, you would absolutely just fry it.
Yeah.
After the interview, Collin showed me what he does to make a watertight seal. He's got a tube plug and a rubber end cap for the PVC pipe. He wraps the piece that goes inside the pipe with plumber's tape several times, and then uses a hose clamp to cinch it up. Pretty cool.
When you're done conducting the test, then you have to go put this back on a computer, upload the information, and correlate the data, et cetera, stuff like that. Okay. And so my understanding is you've done well over 24 tests on this, closing in on 30 tests. Okay, great. And once you're done with the data, I mean, and you're going to use this as part of your thesis for your graduate program, correct? Okay. Are you able to submit this data to anyone? Are there agencies you're looking at? What's the...
Not at the moment.
Okay.
Mainly just for personal use, but until I get some more defined data off of it, then I'll look for places.
So when you conduct the tests, how do you do that? Now, what I saw was you swam over, we went down to the anchor line, you tied it, and then you left. Yeah. I mean, is that basically it?
That's pretty much it. And then I go down again, retrieve some subsurface samples, and then I also have samples at the surface that I collect for water samples. And the two types are that one would be frozen for nutrient samples, and another one would be filtered out on like a little filter for chlorophyll.
Oh, very cool. With the 24 or so tests, more than that, any indication of what you've seen? I mean, what has changed? Certainly you've done this on an ebb tide, on an incoming tide, a slack tide, right? Low slack, high slack. What does the data show you just empirically?
Well, an interesting thing was that on slack tide, there was a current.
Really?
Yes.
Minimal current, though.
Minimal, but there was a current.
Okay.
You can't really feel it when you're diving because you're a lot larger, so you take up a lot more surface area.
And what about the rate of photosynthesis?
Rate of photosynthesis, Well, that would be determined once I have these analyzed.
Okay.
Because the higher chlorophyll would mean a higher rate of photosynthesis,
Okay.
and a lower rate of chlorophyll would mean a lower rate of photosynthesis.
Okay. So I'm assuming a lot of that's going to happen back at school when you have the tools to analyze it. As a graduate student who's clearly interested in the oceans and marine biology and what's what the state of the world is going to be as a young person in this field, what's your biggest concerns for our oceans?
So a funny thing about oceans is that the currents are controlled by not just wind. They're controlled by densities, which is affected by temperature. And so as the temperature increases, the density of the ocean is going to decrease, which means that colder water is going to, it's more like a conveyor belt. So warm water goes over, and then when it cools down, it sinks and goes back down. So that's kind of the flow to it. So as warmer waters come up, as the Arctic starts to warm up as well.
So what's your biggest takeaway from this, other than I know that this is part of your graduate program. I have to assume there's a certain amount of fun and and the fact that you built it yourself and you've got some stuff here that it's kind of cool, honestly.
Yes, I learned a lot. I learned most of the electronic stuff from Dr. Gregory Derby at University of Maine, and then there's a lot of it that I built in myself that I learned just researching. And then sometimes the flow meter would get minimal data, so I would have to incorporate a little plaster of Paris. The water would flow over it. I would have the initial weight, so as the water flows over it, it diffuses around it and just sort of wears it down.
I see. So you had to worry about the hydraulic flow as well. So these little things push it and make it. Very ingenious. Very cool. That's well, I mean, that's how, when you build your own instrument, it's a trial and error. And third iteration that you needed to do to get what needed, right?
Yep.
Wow.
Also like to have a little bit of redundancy just in case one thing fails.
Right. Oh, absolutely. I mean, especially in IT, you know that. You always have some kind of safeguard. And same thing with diving, right? You're a safeguard. Wow, this was really, really cool. I appreciate you meeting me here. We're here in Milford. I know you head back to the University of Maine in another 4 or 5 days or so, which is really cool. Good luck. We'll stay in touch. Let me know. I really want to see the results of these. And that's great. Give Collin some props here and hopefully educate some folks as to, what we need to do. And I'll conclude this later. Once again, I apologize for the poor audio quality during the interview. I tried to clean it up as much as I could. I should have known better. Once the interview was over, I went and did some more research on the deep water current conveyor system for those who have not heard of it. General consensus is that one starting point is in the Norwegian Sea, where warm water from the Gulf Stream heats up the atmosphere in the cold northern latitudes. This loss of heat makes the water cooler and denser, causing it to sink to the bottom of the ocean. As more warm water is transported north, the cooler water sinks and moves south to make room for the incoming warm water. This cold bottom water flows south of the equator all the way to Antarctica. Eventually, the cold bottom waters returns to the surface through mixing and wind-driven upwelling in the Pacific, continuing the conveyor belt that encircles the globe. The biggest concern is the rapid melting of Greenland glaciers and ice cap has created a layer of fresh water that is lighter, less dense than the salt water. It sits atop the salt water and prevents that freezing process and the creation of that very salty, dense water from happening. This process has slowed in recent decades. Consensus is that it is contributing to the abnormal weather patterns we are seeing. Let's look closer to home for those of you who live, work, or play around Long Island Sound. Climate change has affected us too. I pulled some data from the state of Connecticut, NOAA, and the nonprofit organization Save the Sound. There are some very concerning numbers. Since 1985, the waters are much more acidic. Over the past 30 years, data shows the average bottom temperature has risen from a mean average of roughly 53 degrees Fahrenheit to 55 degrees, with an average of 68 degrees in 2020. That is significant. On August 17th in Bridgeport, Connecticut, the surface water temperature was 74.7 degrees. Over the past 20 years, tidal data shows that our tides are higher, and the mean average tide went from roughly 3 feet to 3.4 feet. Even worse, since 1998, we've watched catch rates for winter flounder, rock crabs, and lobster drop. Lobster loss for commercial fishers is dramatic. Numbers had finally started to come back after the blight of the early 1970s. It is clear Long Island Sound has a lobster issue. Temperature may be a factor. Unfortunately, minimal regulations are in place to control the use of malathion and other pesticides that kill lobster and crayfish. There is some good news. According to the 2022 Save the Sound report, while the western end of Long Island Sound continues to have issues, the eastern end has made some significant progress in improving water quality. In fact, just recently, fishermen were complaining about the rise in the number of sandbar, or brown sharks, that are stealing their catch. Now, don't confuse these with the sand tiger shark. Neither are known threats to humans, but they are different sharks. This is good news since their numbers, sandbar sharks, were in serious decline. Well, that was a fun video to make. I want to thank Collin for his time and sharing his experiment with us. I'm sure he'll do well in his last year of his graduate program at University of Maine. We will be doing a follow-up interview next April once he graduates from the program, and hopefully he'll share with us his findings on the experiments that he was doing this summer. I know I shared a lot of information from NOAA, State of Connecticut, as well as the nonprofit Save the Sound organization. Some of it was disturbing, some of it positive. I do think, though, as concerned citizens, if we take our responsibility, we can help save and preserve this beautiful estuary, this body of water called Long Island Sound. As usual, stay tuned for videos that I'm working on. Enjoy your dive adventures. Until next time, as usual, go explore, get wet.